It's very much that vibe. Weird choice. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Kelsey. I'm the creator of Bite Size Ancient History and a recent graduate of Cambridge University. During my time at university, I studied classics at undergraduate level and then Egyptology at master's level. So I've started doing a series to put this information to use and start telling you the historical fact and fiction of some of your favourite films. So don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any. If you're interested in ancient historical content more generally, don't forget to go check out my other socials too. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2016 film Gods of Egypt. Since out of all of the films I've done, this is not exactly the most famous or the most popular, I'm going to be inserting spoiler warnings in front of any major plot points so that you can still enjoy the film after watching this video. Again, I just want to preface my videos like I always do with I am not judging if it is a good or a bad film based on how historically accurate it is, because I understand that films will need to Hollywoodize certain plot lines to make it an interesting movie. Also, it is a fairly long film. I think it was about 2 hours, so I'm not going to be able to cover everything in this video. So if there's anything that I missed that you want me to cover, just comment it down below. If you haven't seen this film before, I would describe it as an action movie. It's very action and then kind of special effects driven. So if you're into that kind of thing, you might really like it. However, I will also mention that representation wise, for a film that's literally titled Gods of Egypt, is not great because there is a lot of whitewashing, obviously, when one of your main characters is Gerard Butler, who is definitely not from the region of Egypt. No hate to Gerard Butler, but it came out in 2016, which is relatively recent in the grand scheme of things, and we knew what whitewashing was then, and we shouldn't have been doing it. With the view to Egyptian mythology, I would generally say it's Egyptian mythology through the eyes of somebody who has really bad eyesight and has forgotten their glasses. Like, you can squint and kind of see their inspiration and the kind of architecture, but generally it's not quite there. Which doesn't mean it's a bad film on that part. Just through a Egyptological perspective, it's questionable. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I'm now going to try and do a super speed summary of the plot. So if you haven't seen the movie, you can still understand what I'm talking about. And again, I will attach spoiler warnings, so if you haven't seen the movie yet and you still think you might want to without getting it ruined, you can. So, 3, 2, 1, let's go. So the general premise of the film is that the Egyptian gods are living among the Egyptian mortals, and the film starts on the day of coronation for the god Horus. Prior to this coronation, his father and mother, Osiris and Isis, are on the throne. Alongside focusing on the gods themselves, it also focuses on two mortals, which are Bek and Zaya. First encounter them when Bek is stealing dresses and jewellery for Zaya for this special coronation day. Coronation day is going well, and then Horus's uncle, so the brother of Osiris, Seth, actually arrives at the coronation, and he has previously been living in the desert. He kind of invades like a, you know, like in Sleeping Beauty where the evil witch kind of comes in and is very unhappy. It's very much that vibe. He's unhappy that he had been allotted the desert while his brother has been able to rule all of Egypt and also bear a son to take over. So with this unhappiness, he kills his brother Osiris. Horus then tries to fight Seth to avenge his father, however he is not successful and both of his eyes are ripped out. Now that Seth is in power, he proclaims that the system of the underworld is going to change. So previously you would be granted an afterlife if you had lived a morally good life. However, now he says you're going to have to pay your way in. The film then jumps a year later. And we see that most of the Egyptian citizens have been enslaved. An example of this is Zaya herself, who is the slave of the chief architect of Seth. Despite this, she still remains faithful to Horus wherever he is. As the slave of the chief architect, she's learnt all of the designs of Seth's buildings, and within one of these he has hidden the eye of Horus. She tells Bek about this and gives him a map so that he can go and rescue the eye and return it to Horus, and they might be delivered from slavery. And he does so successfully. We see it kind of like Indiana Jones style, tumbling, flipping, trying to get through certain booby traps to try and and get to this eye of Horus. However, as he returns to Zaya with the eye, he learns that the architect has found out what she has done, and she gets caught. As they both try and flee and escape, unfortunately he shoots her with a bow and arrow. Is there a better word for that? And she gets killed. So Beck is not very happy. So when he goes to Horus to try and give him the eye, he uses it as a bartering method. And he says that he will give him the eye if he can bring Zaya back to life, which he agrees to. So once he has his eye, he is reinvigorated, he has a lot more power, but he needs the other one still to be fully powerful. He goes to his grandfather Ra in the sky in a solar bark to try and gain more power and defeat Set. While he is there, he gets the waters of creation, and he intends to pour this over the desert because it will drain the power of the desert and therefore the power of Set. This is when I should also mention the character of Hathor. At the beginning, she doesn't really do a lot. We know that she's kind of the consort of Horus. However, when Set comes to power, he keeps her almost as a kind of slave, for want of a better word. But she manages to escape and return to Horus and help him. And importantly, she has this bracelet with, I think, was it 42 stars, that basically protect her from the underworld, because she had once been there and he had helped her escape. To help get Horus's other eye, they team up with another god called Thoth. And this is because he is the god of wisdom, and they need to pass the riddle of the Sphinx to access the other eye. While they eventually work it out, unfortunately, Set finds them here, and he tries to manipulate Beck and say that Horus's promise of returning his girlfriend from the afterlife is not actually achievable, and he has lied. So while Beck is holding the waters of creation and going to use it to finally kill Set, he manages to manipulate him into not doing this. So instead, Set continues to be powerful and he takes the brain of Thoth. And this is another aspect of a god that he has kidnapped. He's also taken the wings of Nephthys along with other body parts of gods to try and power him and make him one all-powerful being. Still angry by the way he was treated before this has all happened, Set goes to visit Ra, and again, he kills him. Hathor, at around the same time, gives her bracelet of protection to Zaya so that she can give it as an offering to the gods so that she might pass into the afterlife and be successful. However, before we even manage to do this, because Ra has been killed, this great evil creature that he had been fighting off called Apophis has again come to power and is now destroying both the living and the dead world. This is then when we have our final fight scene between Horus and Set, and you can guess, if you have any film knowledge, to be honest, of plot or Egyptian mythology, you can guess who wins. Obviously, Horus wins and then Set dies. Horus then goes back to Ra and kind of resurrects him in a way, and because he is indebted to him, Ra says that he will do whatever he wants. And he asks that both Beck and Zaya come back to life. And this is granted. So they're all good, happy ending, end of film. First, I'm going to talk about the general style and themes of the film. So like I said earlier, it's like you're squinting and you can kind of see Egyptian culture and art, but it's not quite there. It's like they kind of flicked at it in a book and thought, yeah, I've got it. And I get why you might need to do that in a film, because it's hard to represent it exactly, and obviously we don't know what the gods would have looked like in 3D, we just have imagery of them, so I get that part. But generally, they could have done a bit better. For example, at the end of the film, Horus starts climbing up these hieroglyphs on the outside of a building, and obviously you can't do that because whether they're indented or coming out of the wall, there's not enough room, whereas they have it basically like a climbing frame. It's really bizarre. Since this is set in a mythological time, because this is when the gods are still living with the humans, we're going to ignore historical aspects because it's impossible to state that, and I'm sure there'll be somebody in the comments saying,
yeah, but it's just mythology anyway, it's not history.
Which I get, yes. But there are still weird points. For example, they have a lot of pyramids for a time where the pyramids had not been built yet. But yeah, maybe there was a mythological time that is completely lost to us and they did have loads of pyramids before the pyramids we know today. Who knows, but still. Another weird choice is the fact that all of the gods are giants. And yes, there are some depictions where the gods are bigger, but it's more for an artistic statement of their importance rather than their actual size, because equally we have a lot of images where mortals and gods are the exact same size. Weird choice, and just an expensive choice, like why? One of the key things that they also show is the fact that the gods bleed gold. And this isn't really an Egyptian thing. Like, I haven't found any texts that describe them as bleeding gold. This is much more an ancient Greek and Roman god thing. The skin of Egyptian gods would have been gold, but there's no account of them bleeding gold. So that's like poor research on that point, because they show that a lot. So let's talk about the character of Osiris. So obviously his death is a major plot point in the film that kind of starts it all going. But how accurate is his character generally? So yes, in a lot of Egyptian mythology, Osiris is shown to be killed by Set, or Seth. There's various ways to pronounce the name. However, beyond this, not so much accurate. It isn't at the coronation of Horus. Horus isn't actually born in most accounts until after the death of Osiris, which is a weird one we'll get to in a second. Not all mythological accounts explain the motives of Set in the killing. The accounts that we do have that mention it describe that there may have been some physical altercation, or potentially the fact that Osiris might have slept with Set's consort Nephthys. So again, the motives are not like those that they show in the film. As is the nature of Egyptian mythology, the actual murder of Seth is very rarely described in detail, because they believed that if you did write it out, it would kind of manifest it into happening all over again. Some early accounts say that he was drowned in the River Nile, while some later accounts say that he was chopped up into 42 pieces and spread across the land of Egypt. And this is where we get our 42 nomes, so like administrative districts of Egypt. After his death, Isis leads some of the other gods with the aim of resurrecting Osiris, and she successfully does this by piecing him back together and using magic. However, he can never be fully alive again, hence he becomes the god of the underworld, which is something they just don't even mention in the film, which I feel like even if you don't know a lot about ancient Egypt, you know that Osiris was the leader of the afterlife. So it baffles me. They also say that Isis committed suicide because she was sad from the death. Again, does not happen. It is then with his corpse, before she fully resurrects him, that she creates Horus. I'm not going to go into more detail. You can think about that one for yourself. Yeah, again, the film does not get that right. So aside from the fact that Osiris is killed by Set, there's not a lot of accuracy in that regard. So who is Set, or Seth? In the film, it talks about him being the kind of god of the desert, and this is accurate. He was associated with the desert, and this was his domain. A lot of later accounts talk about the fact that after Horus and Set battle, they actually become divided. So Horus takes over the land of Egypt, whereas Set gets the desert. Yes, he did attempt to usurp the throne by killing Osiris, as we kind of briefly talked about then. The film also briefly mentions that Ra wants Set to take over control of the solar bark at some point in the future, and this is kind of inspired by fact, because in some Book of the Dead and burial texts, he actually is accompanying on the solar bark and helping fight Apophis each night. They also show him as a jackal when he takes on an animal form, and this is one of the animal forms that we do see him in. It is just one of many though, so they also could have opted for a donkey or an aardvark, to name a few. I understand why they didn't go for the other ones, that makes sense. The film also just generally depicts him as the bad guy of the movie. And this is justified because in the later kind of Greco-Roman periods, he does become a villain in the Egyptian narrative. However, this wasn't true throughout Egyptian history. He was often viewed in a positive light because we needed the balance of Egypt and the desert, good and bad, and so on, to continue our existence. Egyptian culture was all about this balance. Who is Horus, and was his character accurate? Again, he's depicted as an animal when he starts to fight people, and he's depicted as a falcon, and this is accurate. We have many depictions where Horus is in a falcon form. He's also shown to have Hathor as his kind of counterpart, his female counterpart, and again, this is right. In a lot of mythology, they are shown to be sharing a relationship of sorts. He's also depicted as the rightful pharaoh and leader of Egypt before he eventually does become pharaoh. And this is accurate. In general Egyptian culture, he is always viewed as what is true and right in the world, and any mortal pharaohs in the future are all considered to be a kind of mortal embodiment of him. I'll now briefly mention some of the other gods that they focus on and how accurate they are. So we've talked a little bit about Hathor. Yes, she was the consort of Horus. She was also considered the god of love and fertility, as they briefly mention. In the texts that we have that describe this Osirian mythology, she also does play a role in the conflict, but not quite in the same way. So in the film, she's obviously kept by Set, even though she is Horus's partner. In the mythology, it's a little bit weirder than that. She actually exposes her, like, down there to Set in order to distract him while he is fighting Horus. That is the role she plays. And I get why they didn't choose to show that in the film. Late period texts then also mention her role in the underworld, so that's kind of inspired by historical accuracy or mythological accuracy. We also briefly come across Thoth, and yes, he is the god of wisdom, so they've got that absolutely right. They also show Nephthys, and yes, very real god, does have the wings of a kite or bird, as we see. And yes, in a lot of texts, she is married to Set. Let's talk about this Horus and Set conflict in a bit more detail. In the film, Horus is avenging his father and trying to fight Set to regain the throne. And generally, this is the overarching plot of Egyptian mythology. Aside from that, as I mentioned earlier, the exact beginning of it is not accurate. So in Egyptian mythology, there's many rounds to this battle between Horus and Seth, and it actually goes on for about 80 years, which obviously the film does not show it for 80 years, but that makes sense. A lot of the battles are very physical and gruesome, others just take place in front of a kind of court-style hearing with the Ennead. And this is a group of Egyptian gods who are trying to weigh in and decide who should be king and who should not. To name some of the battles, they have a boat race. They also have a physical fight in the form of hippos. Kind of get why the film didn't do that, but could have been entertaining. Rightfully, the Eye of Horus is also a very important plot point in the film and in Egyptian mythology. However, in Egyptian mythology, it is just the one eye. I don't know why they did two in the film, but... So as a solar deity, Horus's eyes are representative of the sun and the moon, and he takes out the eye that represents the moon, which is thought to have bring darkness to the world and basically chaos. So when it is rightfully restored, it is when he sits on the throne and everything is finally as it should be again with the rightful heir. As I mentioned briefly, the actual resolution to this conflict varies in different accounts. So sometimes Horus is the sole winner and he takes over everything, in other times the land is divided between the two of them. So not like in the film where Set just dies, there is no account for that. The afterlife is also an important theme within the film, so let's talk about that. This is definitely an example of when you squint and you kind of see the similarities, but generally it's like they didn't read about it at all because there's not a lot. So they show Anubis as playing an important role in the underworld, and that's accurate, that's great. They also show a kind of hall that you must pass through with loads of judges, and then at the end a weighing scale sequence, and that's right. Aside from that, not a lot else. The rest is pretty bad. So we kind of know about their views of the afterlife and what they believed because we have a lot of burial texts, which you've probably heard of, like the Book of the Dead, pyramid texts, and the Amduat. One of the key things that they talk about in the film is that when Set takes over, you have to pay your way into the afterlife. This was never a thing. There's no account of this. It's just like they said before, Set, and the fact that you kind of get in off your moral virtue. Not necessarily the same morals that we have today, and if you're interested, I can do a separate video on that because we kind of know about their moral system with a set of texts called the wisdom texts. So let me know down in the comments below if you want a separate video on that. But yeah. Wealth never mattered. I'm guessing maybe they were inspired by the fact that with a lot of pharaohs and administrators, they have very wealthy burials. But that didn't determine whether they'd get into the afterlife. It was just they were going to bring that stuff with them because they wanted to and they could. The hall they also describe as the Two Truths Hall. It's not. It's the hall of like 42 negative confessions. And this is again that ideal of like moral virtue. So you'd have to say, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. And if you haven't, it determines whether you're a good or a bad person. At the end, they have the weighing scale and they have a feather. And as I said, that's kind of right. So we have this weighing of the heart scene with the feather of Ma'at. And Ma'at is the representation of truth and justice. So if your heart actually weighed more than the feather, then you had been an unfaithful or an untrue person during your life and you were not passed to the afterlife. Instead, in the film, they show it again with this wealth thing where your money needs to outweigh the feather. There's nothing about that at all. Finally, towards the end of the film, we kind of appreciate this destructive creature called Apophis. And this was a real creature from Egyptian mythology. This creature embodied chaos and destruction. And in our burial texts, we see that figures like Ra, also like Horus and like Seth, would have to go on a journey every single day. And each night, there is more risk of chaos and they have to fight Apophis in order for a new day to dawn. So this, they got accurate. And yes, they do this being carried on a solar bark. So we can give them credit there towards the end of the film. I think that is all we're going to have time for. I hope my description didn't corrupt your views of the film too much. You may enjoy it. But don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other socials, and I'll see you next week. Bye!